Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about something that I only vaguely know what it's going to be about. Josh really loves to do these surprise topics with me.
Sometimes I do, and sometimes Kim does it back.
I do?
Sometimes. But I do enjoy kind of springing it on you because, to be honest, if I don't do that, we'll end up having the whole conversation before we click the record button.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. Okay, so what are we talking about today?
Well, so we have a little bit already started talking about some of this. In this morning, Kim sent me a quiz that was for what was the name of it?
Like basic needs.
Yeah, basic needs quiz. And so that got us talking about like a strengths finder quiz, which took us to like Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and some of those things. And so we've been chatting about that for the past hour. And one thing that I think is curious, which came up for both of us on some of those quizzes, was struggling to express emotion or not valuing emotion or lots of other terminology, but that sort of showed up for both of us in the quizzes that we took.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I had already been planning on bringing this up, just sharing a story from my life. And then this morning we sort of like addressed that from a different perspective, but it was interesting. So let me tell you the story, and then we can just have a conversation about it, and maybe you'll see how it tied into some of those things. So this weekend, I helped a friend work on a project at a house, and it involved digging a trench around the house. And like it was manual labor, but it really wasn't like wildly strenuous. Like they had overwatered their lawn, so it was nice and soft ground, and it really wasn't like wildly hard. And um, later that day, I went and got dinner with my mom and my wife, and then we watched a movie together. The movie, if you haven't seen it, it was called True Spirit. It's on Netflix. It's a story about a 16-year-old girl from Australia who solo sails around the world, um, unassisted and nonstop. So she didn't pull into any port. She went all the way around without um, without stopping and without being in contacted with another boat. And um, I thought it was kind of going to be like a cheesy, inspirational type movie. And it was actually, I would say, relatively well done. Like I was pleasantly surprised by it. But there's this part of it where that's not going to be a huge spoiler, but oh well. She is in a storm and her boat gets flipped over and she winds up like 15 feet under the water. Her boat's upside down. Um, and her family gets a call from her automated like emergency system that says her boat's been capsized. And it's just kind of like this intense moment. The music is whatever vibe that is, it's intense, it's dramatic, and her family is all going through all these emotions, and it keeps cutting back and forth between her and her boat upside down in the water and her family. And I have no idea how long it actually was. In the movie it's like maybe 30 seconds or so. In real life it maybe wasn't very long. I don't actually know. But I started to get teary-eyed, and I pulled out my phone and I started like doing something on my phone, and my wife goes, what are you looking at? And I was like, anything but this. Like, I was like actively trying to shut down my emotions.
Huh.
And what's interesting is like, I don't know if I would have said it in the moment, but I was a little bit hesitant to like cry in front of my wife and my mom.
Hmm.
Like, and it was interesting. Like, um, I love to look back and like analyze things. And so looking back, I'm like, it doesn't actually make a lot of logical sense. Like, but in the moment, that's kind of what I was feeling like this, oh, I'm gonna seem weak or something like that. And so I didn't think much of it. And the next day I woke up and my arm hurt so bad. And I was just like, oh man, like I it must be from digging that trench the other day. Like, um, I was, trying to be like, oh, it's just a sore muscle. But I couldn't stretch out my arm. I couldn't pick anything up with my arm. Like, it was in a lot of pain. And I kind of didn't do much with it that day. And then that night, my body was running a fever, but I wasn't sick, but it was like a pain fever. Like my body was hurting so much that I was having a fever. And um, the next day, like my arm wasn't any better. In fact, it like hurts because I can't extend it and it's just sore and tight. Um, and I go to my men's group, and some of you have seen Dr. Farney on some of our episodes, and he was there. And so, partially through the night, I'm kind of just telling him about, hey, like, yeah, my arm's really hurting. Would you take a look at it? Um, and so he starts digging into it, and I'm like, yeah, it's in my forearm. I can't, it's weird. I don't know what's going on. And so he starts kind of like looking at, well, your forearm connects to here and it does this. And he's like, he's like, it's not making sense. It's not connecting the dots for me. And so he started like moving around and looking at other aspects of my body, and he got to my bicep and he was like, oh, your biceps like totally locked in place. And so he started kind of doing some muscle work on it and massaging it and doing pressure points and actually got it to release to where I could like extend my arm for a few seconds, and then it locked back up again. And so he started asking me, he's like, well, that your bicep connects to your heart. And he's like, so what's going on in your heart? Like, following the path like a good doctor. And I'm like, yeah, like I don't know, I'm not sure. And so he asked me to start telling him about my day, and I start working through. And I'm like, yeah, and I watched this movie, and he's like, well, is it emotional? And I'm like, yeah, but I kind of like shut that down. And he's like, okay, tell me more about that. And um, we sort of like just followed this trail until we got to um, something in the movie where there was a fear of one of the family members dying, took me back to a childhood memory where I um, wasn't even like real, but somewhere in my like little child mind thought that one of my family members might die, and like a feeling of hopelessness and not being able to help in that situation.
Hmm.
So kind of like a weakness feeling. And so something was connecting in that I don't want to feel weak story for me. And what was interesting was he goes, well, you shut down the emotion of I don't want to feel weak because you didn't want to feel weak in that moment. But then your body manifested weakness because you didn't allow the energy to leave your body. And it was just really intriguing to me because I'm going to make an assumption. A lot of people have physical things that happen, strain, sore muscles, injuries, because for a similar reason, because maybe they don't allow themselves to feel an emotion, to be weak in a moment, to do something,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. It could look different for every person. And that energy gets stuck in their body. And so then they have this physical reaction to that. And mine just happened to be feeling weak. But it literally felt like someone had tied a string between my bicep and my forearm, almost like my arm was in a sling. And I couldn't do things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and had to rely on my wife to do things and had to adjust the way that I did things. And it manifested weakness in my body. And it's fascinating to me because his solution for me was to rewatch the movie and let myself cry, or just sit down in a time of meditation or something and go back to the childhood memory and let that feeling out. And it was
Mm.
just like, man, like that's, yeah, there's something physical going on, and you can work on massaging the muscle and releasing the tension, but it was caused because of something not super physical. And I think that's intriguing because then we go into this morning's conversation and we start talking about like, don't like to feel vulnerable and weak, or emotions are challenging sometimes. And I'm like, man, like I just very real experienced what that can be like, and how that aspect of, I would say, like maybe my soul's natural bent, um like I need to work on growing that, because I'm seeing how some of those things directly impact your physical life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because you were telling me about your arm yesterday, and I almost pulled a Farney and asked, like, what are you dealing with? Like,
Uh-huh.
or what are you not dealing with?
Right.
Because typically this is what he asks me.
Mm-hmm.
But I have something going on with me. He's like, what are you not dealing with? Because I tend to be an avoider of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I mean, a few months ago, for probably a month and a half, I was having a hip issue, which is a very bizarre place for me to have issues, just based on how my body's built. And it would not go away. And it freaking hurt. Like, it was just, it was painful. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I don't know why. And I think it was in a conversation with you, Josh. You're like, well, which one is it? Is it on your right side or your left side? Oh, well, that side is your feminine side or something. I don't know. I don't know as much about this as you do. Anyway, then it boiled down to, oh, is there something? It's like grief. You must not be dealing with grief. And I'm like, well, son of a gun, you're right. My grandmother passed away last November. This is how long ago it was. Last November, my grandmother passed away. I was halfway across the world. I didn't get to say goodbye, like these things. Um, and I, after I came home, I, was dealing with funeral stuff and getting our house into maintenance of like being normal and all of these things. And I just was avoiding that emotional work. And that's what it feels like to me, because I don't know, emotions, feelings are not my natural, easy state of being. It just isn't. I don't think they're bad. I just have a really hard time dealing with them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so anyway, I just like hit the nail on the head. Oh, you haven't dealt with some grief. Yeah, you're right. Okay. So then I go deal with the grief, and all of a sudden my hip is better. I had no adjustment, like no physical adjustment. It is just like what you're talking about, this energy that gets stored up because you won't deal with it.
Well, and
However, I can't relate so much with your not crying at a movie because that is the one place I will let myself cry. In front of people, whatever, I'll ugly cry. It's fine.
I think that was the issue for me was I had like tears coming out, but I felt like I was about to ugly cry and I didn't want to do that.
Got it.
And that's yeah, it's interesting to me. And I think okay, so like you're telling the story of your grandma and something that happened almost a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
10 months ago. And like you're just now putting together that, oh, that was connected. And I think I I'm curious if as we become more attuned to what our body is saying, if we can start to recognize it earlier. I mean, whatever manifested in my arm was unavoidable, but how many of the things like little aches and pains or soreness do we just ignore and write off as something else, but it's really connected to it?
Right.
And I have to think that with awareness and with healing, you start to be like, oh, something feels off, that like what's that connected to?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it just is like, oh, I was digging a trench yesterday and my muscles sore. But maybe it's, oh no, it's connected to this and this and this. And I just think that it's really something I think to pay attention to, especially if you're on like an emotional health journey, is like pay attention to how it's affecting your body, because maybe that will be the first clue that something's off in some situations.
I think you're right. And I think it's interesting. We were talking about this earlier when we were taking all these different tests and talking about that before the show. Um, I think these personality tests go only so far
Mm-hmm.
because I've gotten to the point where I am testing out differently, which they say is not possible because psychologically you're fully grown and developed by the age of 25 and nothing can ever change after that, blah, blah, blah. Right. So those things. But I also think that the more that I'm working on my whole being and connecting my body to my soul, to my spirit, and having all of those parts working together, I am not always dictated primarily by my natural personality, like what my soul wants to be. Like all of a sudden, now the spirit has a say, and now my body has a say, and the things work in conjunction, and it looks a little bit different. So it's like teamwork looks a little different than what an individual might put out for work, right? It has a little bit of a different voice, has a different flavor, essence, whatever you want to call it, but it's good and necessary, right? Because all the parts were working together. And I think sometimes I enjoy looking at personality things and understanding how my soul works and how other people's do. I call it my soul because I think that's kind of mind, will, and emotions. That's how I would define your soul. And personality is kind of wrapped up in there. But understanding how that works is really great. But I also want to understand how my body works well. And that is also work that I'm doing. But I also want to know how my spirit works well. And I don't know that there are actually ample like tests for that. However, I think that there is paying attention and like digging into it in your journey that you can do. But as those things work together, it may look different than if you're letting only one of them lead, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. I have a theory um, that your soul's personality is largely dictated by who you had to be as a child to be safe.
Hmm.
And so through trauma, through other situations, you develop these traits to survive, essentially.
Hmm.
And if you just let them, yeah, I think that becomes who you are, how you function. But if you're pursuing healing and working through, like, and I would just say, like the example I gave earlier, like I felt weak and helpless in some situation in a child where honestly I don't even know that I really was. I don't even know that the threat was real, but that was the story that my brain, body, soul took.
Right.
Um, and but I think if I'm able to bring healing to that area, that probably changes the way that I deal with emotions going forward. And there's
That's
probably
true.
more than one situation as a child where I felt that way, and lots of different things that add up, like to validate that feeling. And so I'm not like it may not just be dealing with that one memory or whatever. But I do believe that dealing with internal healing helps um, helps your body come into alignment with uh, I don't even know if I can say your real identity. Maybe so, maybe your real identity. And I'm not sure exactly like if your soul just innately has an identity, or if coming into your real identity is coming into the identity of your spirit.
Hmm.
um, we just recently had a conversation, depending on when this episode airs, it'll either be coming out soon or have already come out, with Michael C. Keene, uh, about, and one of the things he mentioned, the conversation was about immortality, but one of the things he mentioned was he sees people die sometimes because the emotional weight that they're carrying just gets to a point where they don't want to carry it anymore. And so he's a huge proponent of inner healing, because it helps lighten the load that you're carrying, which will ultimately help you step into immortality. And my personal belief of that is if I'm shedding the identities and traumas that my soul took as a child, um, then and I'm coming into my real identity, which possibly is the identity of my spirit, then I would be taking on the identity of immortality because that's my spirit's identity.
Hmm. I have to wonder, as you're talking about this, I wonder, what do you think is the role of the soul? Like,
Mm.
if we're spirit, soul, and body, and if your theory is accurate, that your personality is developed when you're young, in a way that will keep you safe, like, is your soul's role to protect your body and allow it to function so that your spirit can function in this earth? I guess that's really where I'm getting.
I tend to look at the soul as the in between, like mediator, communicator between all of them. Like it's where you feel what's going on in your body. It's where you feel what's going on in the spirit. It's like, and so I almost lean more towards your soul being like what you might perceive as who you are, interacting with these other things. I don't know if that makes sense, but kind of being
Kind of.
like,
Is it like the
kind of,
translator?
yeah, like, I mean, we've talked about the soul being the mind, will, and emotions. Well, without having a mind, will, and emotions, what goes on in your body has no meaning to you. What goes on in the spirit has no meaning to you. And
Mm.
so, like, if the soul is where you experience things, then like that's sort of where I lean, at the moment in my understanding of that.
Hmm. It's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know that I have any like solid opinions about it, but it's certainly something to ponder. You know how we always talk about like, I just like being brought to a place, like given something to chew on. Like, I don't want you to
Mhm.
feed me, but like, give me something to chew on for a bit and wrestle
Take
with. And
take me to the buffet, but don't like fly the airplane into my mouth.
maybe, yeah, I think so. Hmm. Yeah. Or kind of like a wine tasting.
Mm.
Let's just make all the food analogies. You know, a wine tasting where you like taste it and then you spit it into a bucket.
Yeah.
Like you see what you actually want to consume and what you don't. But you have to test it all out first. I don't know. That went into a strange place. But I do think if we're talking about personality and kind of these different functions and emotions and vulnerability, um, I think kind of even admitting some realities to yourself is a good place to start. I tend to really hate vulnerability. Isn't that super? It's not like a strength, and I'm not like proud of it, but I know that that's kind of where I am.
Hmm.
And I think that's why, like I said earlier, I can watch a movie and I can let it go. Like I'll cry, I'll ugly cry. It's fine because I'm not actually feeling my emotions. I'm feeling the emotions that are evoked from this movie, which
Sure.
allows for a release of sorts, but it doesn't
Hmm.
actually get me to deal with my own junk. And see how that could be really unhealthy. I think I've got some work to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone does. I do think even if you're not directly dealing with your own things, just the release of of the energy is is important. Um, I personally believe that, um, and I heard this piece from my wife that emotion is energy in motion, and so it
Mm.
is, yeah, it's energy flowing through you, expressing itself in a certain way. Um, and trauma comes when that energy isn't allowed to flow, when it gets stuck and it's not allowed to express itself. And so, maybe watching a sad movie or an emotional movie is your body's way of releasing the energy in little bits at a time in ways that it knows how to do it. And I don't like,
Maybe.
maybe it isn't directly addressing the deep part, but maybe it's allowing enough of the energy out at a time that your body doesn't get overwhelmed and your arm doesn't lock up and you can't move it for 3 days. Like, you know, it's not a lot of fun.
Let's
It's
avoid that.
it's still, I would say, like 60 or 70%. Like it's still pretty, like I have some things I need to work on this afternoon.
I was going to say, so if we're talking about vulnerability, and recently we did a whole month of action,
Mhm.
what's the action that has to be taken?
So I this is my um desire. I have a massage gun that I plan on using just to physically help my muscle that's tight and sore and whatever release. But I would like to use that while sitting in a time of stillness, um and really like attempting to process some emotion, like kind of let that energy out. And I did this last night. I found myself, like really, like ever since I've been a kid, I have really enjoyed, um, being in the shower and just like letting the water run over me and feeling things. And it's like become a place of it's almost like letting the water wash the energy off your body, or um, letting the water, or just being in the water and being able to feel the water on you. Like some reason it just became a safe place for me. So last night when I got home, uh, I sat in the shower for probably 20 minutes and just let myself like sit in the, like, there wasn't like big emotions coming up, but like letting myself sit in like, yeah, like I did shut that down, and I'm sorry, body, that I shut that down, and like just having a conversation with myself um through that. And I would say like I felt a notable improvement in my body and in my arm. It's still not 100%, but I'm like, okay, I need to continue allowing that to flow. So that's my plan for the day, is to
Good.
slowly continue allowing myself to feel that uncomfortableness and hold myself in it. Like, I mean, because isn't that like, as the child who like was scared that something was going to happen that they didn't have any control over, like what would that child have wanted? Just to be held.
Right.
And so can I do that for myself? Like in this situation, can I just allow it to be there?
That's good. That's really good. I have uh notes. I was looking for them earlier from when we were recording with Dr. Farney, and then I was talking about a shoulder issue I was having. Remember I told you I had a hip issue?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, now I'm out having a shoulder issue. And he gave me a whole list of things that I also need to address. So here's my commitment to at least address them this afternoon.
I'm looking forward to our next recording, and maybe we can touch on
Maybe
some
we'll be a
progress
blubbering
updates.
mess, both of us. What if we had a whole episode of us just ugly crying? We had a whole episode of just ugly laughing.
That's true. That's
Also, can
true.
I just address this for a second? I was talking to some friends, I don't know, a couple months ago, and about how difficult it is to have in our society to have a male who is like has dominant emotions as like a primary function,
Mm-hmm.
and how societally we've kind of made it to the point where the only acceptable emotion for a man to show is anger. And so you get these men who are built in this way, their soul or personality is such that they lead with emotions, but the only emotion that they're ever taught that is okay to lead with is anger. And then we see all this aggression that comes out. And like, I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but I just feel like, can we normalize having like the full gamut of emotions without it having to be some gender-based thing? Like, I am I'm a woman who tends to not lead with emotions, which is why I like really like to ball them up, put a pretty bow, and like shove it down. It's not healthy. It's not like ideal, which is why I need to work on dealing with the emotions. But can we like allow even men who do function highly in emotions and feelings to work through those normal emotions as they come and not have to turn it into something that is masculine? Like, I feel like anger has been like the emotion that is masculine and okay.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that corner I just turned.
No, I think what you say is important to it's I think it's important that we start normalizing like mental health and emotional health and physical health for men and women. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I just think that that's important to pay attention to. I really enjoy the teachings of Brene Brown.
Mm-hmm.
um, and there's a somewhat viral clip of her talking about how for the first, I want to say, a few years, and I'm not going to directly get this quote right, but like of her research, so I think it was the first few years of her research, she didn't even interview men because she didn't value their emotion and that aspect. And like I I think sometimes, not across the board, but sometimes that's how society views men in general.
Mm-hmm.
And and then in some situations that's how society views women. And I think that it's important, like both aspects are so important. Like I think to really have a full whole society, male and female, have to come into wholeness of who they are and who they were created to be. And that may look different for each and every one of them.
Mm. I think it's so true. I mean, we talk about wholeness within ourselves, within our being. So even just in this episode, we're talking about body, soul, spirit, right? And
Mm-hmm.
allowing these different pieces to be developed and heard and valued and all of these things. But if we're working on developing that, then why would we not be working on the bigger picture? And like, yeah, you can carry this piece and it's valuable and it's helpful for society, regardless of what it looks like compared to anyone else. But can we like bring all of the pieces into the fold as opposed to kind of discounting or disqualifying the man or the woman or the black or the white or the rich or the poor or whatever it is, right? Based on these labels that we put on them, like, can they hold intrinsic value? And can we allow them to work within that value in society without it being some big comparison game, some big competition, um, something where we're just trying to rise in the ranks? But can we just allow people to be who they're made to be
Yeah.
and then operate in that whole? I think that is the idealist in me. Like truly, it's coming out. I'm shining it for everyone to see. But I think that's where my heart is with that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is can we just be who we're made to be and still be valued in the whole?
I personally, I think yes. Like I know, like you said, idealist, but like I do believe that that is a possible future for everyone to walk in wholeness.
Yeah.
It may not come quickly, may not come without some like grinding and um, challenging moments, but like I do think that that's possible, and I do think that's actually the direction the world's heading.
I think that would be amazing. And I truly think that if we're willing to put in the work on ourselves to be whole, you see all of the like, emotional intelligence, like all of the self-help stuff, people are in it, right? The spiritual awakening that's happening, people are in it, like ready to get to this wholeness within themselves. Can we also be willing to put that hard work and be subject to some of the grinding societally? And I think you're right. I do think it's going in that direction. And I would love to see that like really starting to shine.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Hmm.
Well, I'm excited to see updates from both of us on maybe just like not, I mean, eventually this podcast will get our whole journey, but I mean, my arm, your shoulder, like let's, I'm excited for that.
I know. Maybe we need to have, how we had like a month of action and then we had like a month of interviews. Maybe we should have a month of vulnerability. Doesn't that sound terrible?
Yeah, I was just thinking, let's do that and not post any of them.
I think we were even just talking about this the other day. Like, what level of vulnerability am I willing to have on the show and publicly and out there for everyone to poke and prod and uh, evaluate on their own? And it's very low. It is.
It
I hold
is,
my cards
yes.
very close to the chest. Like, I tend to be not an open book unless you know me very well. Like, maybe my top 3 people, right?
Yeah.
But is there value in vulnerability? Even just after this conversation, I think there is.
Mm-hmm.
And just like we always make this comparison, I'm sorry, it's so cliche. Just like in our own bodies, when we're not willing to be vulnerable and things get locked up, how is that similar in the whole body, like the body of Christ, when we're not willing to be vulnerable, and then we have different parts of the body getting locked up and not able to move or function in the way they're supposed to?
Yes.
Right. So can I open myself up to that? I think I can. Will it be wildly uncomfortable? Absolutely. Will I want to feel shame? Yes. Will I work on not feeling shame? Yes.
I love it. I love it.
So there we are, I suppose.
Welcome to the show, everyone.
Welcome to the show. We've said it's a continual journey, and here we are. I'm willing to do the hard things if it means like better future.
Yeah, I agree.
So sweet. Okay.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. See ya.
Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.